planting a garden and reading seeds. What are some things you need to know? So some of this is going to be a little bit of repeat of what I talked about on Friday, but I just wanted to give us a little broader understanding of what you need to understand to be able to plan a garden. All right. So this map shows planting zones. And as you can see, it's color coded. And then over on the side, it's got average, annual, low. Okay, so you don't even see white on this map, but if you look at the purple, negative 30 degrees through negative 40 degrees. So there are not very many places that get that cold in the United States. And that is going to be important when you start thinking about planting things and understanding how to pick plants for planting where you live. If you notice, right, there's a lot of yellow, right? And places that like, I mean, we're looking, here's Georgia over here, and then here's Seattle, and we're really similar in terms of like what it says our planting zone is. So the last frost date, this is also something that relates to hardiness zone, and it's the last day that you could expect frost where you live. So for example, here in Seattle, April the 10th is considered the last frost date for Seattle. And so if I'm reading a packet of seeds, it will say, plant these seeds 4 weeks before the average last frost date, or plant it after the last frost date. We don't often get frost that late in the year, but that is something that can happen. And so you sort of need to be aware of like, what is that time frame for where you live? A planting zone is determined by like the number, like what's the coldest it gets for a period of time. So that map that we looked at earlier, that is the hardiness zone map. And the reason why that matters is because, for example, if I'm going to buy a plant and it says this plant is hardy to zone 8, then that means it should grow in the Northwest. I should be able to plant it and grow it here in Seattle. But it's really important to understand that other things come into factor besides just hardiness zone. Hardiness zone refers to like this plant will survive down to this minimum temperature. So plants that can survive, it'll say can survive down to like 20 degrees. And while that may mean that your plant will survive, it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to thrive. And the reason for that is because if you think about Texas, right, Texas gets way hotter than we get here in Seattle. It's hotter at night, which is a big factor, and it's hotter during the day. So even though in the summertime we have more hours of light, we just don't get the same kind of heat that, for example, Texas or Georgia has. So while you can grow it here, it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to thrive here. So like I have subtropical plants in my yard here in Seattle because there are many plants that can actually withstand being quite cold. That's why you see like palm trees in Seattle, you see cactus in some places in Seattle, and that's because those plants can survive down to a minimum temperature, but it doesn't necessarily mean they're going to ever like flower and fruit here in the Northwest because it's frankly not hot enough for them to do that. Seed packets, like I said last week, it tells you what's the temperature requirement. And if you try and plant seeds before it's that warm, they just won't germinate. So the way that I get around that is I plant seeds inside. And if it's something that really needs a lot of heat, not only will I plant it inside into a pot or a tray, but I'll put a heat mat underneath it to get it really warm. Pepper seeds are a great example of this. Pepper seeds need to be really warm. Some flower seeds also need to be really warm. And so I will give them a jump start by planting them on a heat mat and giving them a little jump start there. Days to germinate means how many days before your first leaves show up. Days to maturity or harvest means how many days after germination before you can actually harvest it. So, for example, like parsley is one of the longest germinating kitchen plants. It's up to 25 days to germinate. And then after that, since it's a herb, it's like as soon as it gets to be, has a significant number of leaves, you can harvest it. So some plants actually need a cold period to germinate. So like lavender needs to get cold before it germinates, which is kind of weird since it's a Mediterranean plant. Planting depth and space. So when you're looking at a packet of seeds and it talks about planting depth and space, it'll tell you how deep to plant it, and then it says how far apart. But when it says that on the package, that means like how far apart you can plant it when you're planting it outside so that it can reach maturity. You can plant things actually closer together when they're in a pot because you're going to separate them and plant them outside anyway. Variety and heirloom. What do those words mean? So variety means the specific version of that plant. So if I was talking about jeans, I would be talking about not just like I could say blue jeans, I could say pants, and I could say blue jeans, and I could say like all the different kinds of blue jeans that there are out there in the world, of which there are many, right? And it matters, right? If you're buying pants, you don't just say, I'm going to go buy jeans. You're like, I'm going to go buy high waisted, flare leg, whatever jeans, ripped jeans. So that matters. And it's the same thing with plants. So knowing what your variety is going to mean, are you going to get a cherry tomato? Are you going to get a red cherry tomato, a yellow cherry tomato, an orange cherry tomato, a purple cherry tomato, like whatever it is. Heirloom is a designation. Heirloom is those are plants that breed true from their seed. And the reason why that matters is because if you're someone who wants to collect your seed at the end of the season and then plant them the next year, hybrid seeds do not always reproduce the same plant because they are a hybrid from a couple different parents. So heirloom seeds do reproduce true from seed. So that's actually one of the things that you would want to know. And all of that information is on a packet. Thinning. Some plants say that they need to be thinned, and that's because typically the seeds are so small that when you plant them, you just physically cannot get them separated enough when you're planting them. So usually you plant more than you're going to grow, and then you pull out the smallest ones and keep the biggest ones. And so carrots and lettuce and beets, and there are a lot of plants that do that. Some of those, sometimes companies sell those plants on like a little strip of tape that then you then unroll, and it's got like the seed measured out a special distance on the tape. And so they do it like that. Trellising means you need to make sure that you've got something for it to climb on. And typically, you want to set up trellising for plants when they're not very big. Those of us who grew beans at the beginning of the semester, first semester, like you got to see that your plant needed something to climb on. Here's the anatomy of a seed. And this is a dicot seed, but all seeds, either you have one leaf inside or two leaves inside. And so the apicotyl is the stem above the leaf, and the hypocotyl is the stem, and the radicule is the root, and the seed coat is protection for the seed, and the cotyledon is the first leaf. So this part here, this is actually going to be the first leaf when it pops open. This is going to be the first set of true leaves. So it's a second set of leaves that are inside of the seed. And we're done.